Hi everybody. Today I'm going to paint one of my favorite places here at home. It's a maple tree where I've hung two very large, heavy wind chimes. And I love how whenever the wind blows, there are these two completely different sounds from the different sizes of the two wind chimes. And I've put it next to the horse pasture so that they would be used to different sounds. And I've drawn a little sketch and put the horizon line about here. I haven't decided yet whether I will include my neighbor's fence in the painting or just extend the greenery of the lawn and the pasture that is there for the horses. So I'm going to start with a wash, and I'm going to use my hake brush. This is the hake brush. This is about an inch and a half, maybe an inch and 3/4 hake. I've got different sizes of hake. They're very good for this sort of large work. You can also use other brushes, like let me show you some others that I also sometimes use. There's this little short one here that is got fairly strong bristles. Then there's this one here that's got soft bristles. Sometimes I even use a standard brush for painters, for putting the water on. It really doesn't matter what you use to put your water on. As long as you get it on. And what I've done is I've mixed some cerulean, which is this wonderful blue color. And I'm quite comfortable with the cerulean being in the grass and being also part of the leaves of the tree. I'm going to minimize its involvement in the trunk of the tree, but it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to put it here. It's a wonderful color for the sky. Some of it will come down here, and I'm fine with that, into the grass. And I'm just going to take a paper towel and take it pretty much out of the trunk of the tree. But there's my cerulean wash. I don't need to do more. I'm not going to add any additional colors because this painting is of the evening sky when the sun is setting behind me and casting this long shadow of the wind chimes on the lawn and this strong shadow onto the tree and onto some of the leaves. So the sky over here behind is a fairly bright sky. It's an evening sky, but it's all one color. As the sun sets, the sky will, of course, behind us have a range of changing colors of the setting sun. But what's in this direction is just a normal sky. So this is the beginning of the painting. And I don't think I'll use any cling wrap in this painting. I also don't need to use in my sky a combination of colors. So this will be a pretty straightforward painting with a brush in different colors. Now the painting, I'm going to put a little water down here because I'll just drop in a little bit of some green. Let me pick a green that will be a good one for the base of this. I'm not going to go quite as yellow for my green as what's in the photograph. And I'm not going to go to an olive green. So I'm picking what's called a type of emerald, or it's called a Winsor green. This one is made by Winsor Newton. So I think you can see that color. It's got a fair amount of water in it. And it's just to begin the process of mapping out the painting. See, it's actually pretty close in many ways to the cerulean, but I'm just going to go back and forth a little bit in order to make sure that this color, this wash, spreads pretty evenly. And when you go back and forth like this, the color deposits into, it deposits into the little texture. You see how textured this paper is? This is rough Fabiano paper. So as I move the color, some of it will settle in those crevices, and so it'll create a slightly textured look. I've got a little spot there I have to remove. There. And a little spot here to remove. Okay, so I've got a little bit of granulation that has settled into. I haven't used really any granulating colors. The Winsor green is pretty transparent. The cerulean blue is fairly transparent. So, but I just want to begin the process of putting that color on the painting. I'm going to remove a tiny bit on the disc here because some of that disc will be very bright and have a white, because it's metal, have an almost white reflection in the sunlight. Okay, so that is the start of the painting, and then it'll be a process of working on the leaves of that tree. You can see that some of the leaves have a very bright sunlight from the setting sun on them, and some are really in shadow and dark, and there's some kind of mottled light that is hitting some of the wind chimes, and then the shadows of the wind chimes, the shadow of the tree. I have some other photos where the shadows of the wind chimes are a little further behind and they are stronger, so I may decide, because I took about 15 photos at different times a day, So I may put the wind chime shadows a little further behind. And then we'll do this wonderful root system here. The background will be light and loose, not very detailed at all. Okay, so we have to let that dry. Then we can come in and start working on the, oops, there you go. Start working on them. Let me raise this up a little bit. There. We'll start working on the, I think I'll begin with some of the leaves of the trees here. And then work my way down to the wind chimes. The shadows will be the last thing we put in. We'll put in some shadows. There are wonderful shadows cast by this tree on the grasses. There's some wonderful bushes here, some shadows cast here. There's another tree with got some shadows on the trunk, so we'll put that in also. And I'll decide about the fence at the last minute. I can always put that in later if I want. I probably won't put it in. Okay, I hope you're enjoying the process to begin. Well, I showed you a photograph of my wind chimes and the maple tree, and there's another tree behind, and a little bit of the shadowing. The background I'm not quite sure about. The fence might leave it out. But one of the things I'll do to start is just take some, after I put in the wash of cerulean blue, and then I went over it in some places with manganese blue because it was very, very light. So what I want to do is just roughly, in the areas where the photograph shows the bright light of the evening sky landing on some of the leaves, I'm going to put a little bit of Aurelian yellow in those places to remind myself about protecting the light as I go along, and to basically move around that light later with the shadow colors and the more intense colors. But the tree trunk at the bottom of the tree is very, very much in the light and has a very warm cast to it. Also, the bottom of this tree is also very much in the light. So I'm just going to indicate to myself, and some of those roots are truly in the light also, just going to indicate some of that dappling of yellow that is happening up here, here and there, and make sure that it gets in and doesn't get lost. There isn't a whole lot of it, but where it is, it's powerful and important. It's an important part of this composition, and it travels up into some of these areas. Here and there, parts of leaves, like here, part of the leaf. Up here, there'll be part of a leaf. Okay, the tip of a leaf here. So that's just the way I'm going to start that. I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom of the wind chime. Also very much in light, a little bit of dappling here and there on the wind chime as the leaf shadows affect the wind chime, and the circular thing on the bottom is also partially in light and partially in shadow. So I'm just going to do that because it's based on that exact moment in time of the light at that time. I also have in the green grass, there's some very clear areas of very bright light. So I'm just going to paint those in. I don't often sketch with a pencil or something what I'm going to do. I mean, while I put the tree in and I more or less measured out my horizon line, I'm not going to, I don't do precise sketching of the other parts. I sketch with my paintbrush as I go along, whether I'm working outside. I may do a little part of this painting outside for some detail, but I've already spent a fair amount of time out in my yard studying this and taking quite a few photos. And so the shadow will go there like that. And the reason I can do it this way is since green is made of blue and yellow, I can just adjust the green to be the green that I want it to be later. But I can sketch this light yellow, this very transparent yellow, onto this blue, and later adjust for the exact green that I might want in this. And there'll be light coming through some of the leaves here and there. There'll be a small amount of dappling on this tree back here. Not as much, but some. The shadow of this tree is very, very strong, very straight, and it basically goes through like this here. And all of this part is in light, so I don't have. This is all in light. There's a little bit of shadow from the leaves above, but down by the base of the tree, this is all in light. So I'll just show that. Then I'll come in with the correct kind of colors. This whole painting will be done simply with brushwork. No cling wrap or anything like that to get any texture. So I'll have a little more, again, a little bit of sunlight on some of these pipes of the wind chime. And what's kind of interesting is this wind chime, I've had it now about, I've had it about 20 years, both of them, and they're wonderfully vocal and letting me know when the wind is kicking up for a storm. And I've put it out near the pasture so that the horses would be used to sounds all the time and not feel spooked by them. And I love walking around the yard and having different wind chimes in different areas of the yard that have different tones. So it's like going from one part of the orchestra to another. Okay, I think that's the way I'm going to start that. This way I have a little more dappling also down in here from the tree because the leaves are coming over this way, and so there's a little bit of dappling of the leaves on this side because the sun is setting over on the other side. So here and there I've got a little bit of dappling. And over here is where I'll be putting in that the shadows for the wind chimes. And those, basically most of this painting is green, and there are the soft browns of the trees that are really very, very brightly lit by the evening sun. I'll show you one more time just how incredibly bright they are. And but much darker up in here. So I'll be using some warm burnt umber and some warm raw sienna because they are very light. But as I move up into this area, I'll use some Van Dyke brown, perhaps mixed with some ultramarine to make the neutral. The wind chimes are a forest green, so I'll use some ultramarine, maybe mixed with an ochre. So I carry through the ultramarine, and then I'll probably use some ultramarine within the shadow colors of some of these leaves so that there'll be this continuity of the blues and then the soft, very soft browns here, and the very bluish green and the bluish brown in the trees. The shadows, again, they will have a slight bluish cast. I don't know whether I'll use Payne's Gray in that shadow, or blue shade of Payne's Gray, or maybe mix it with the ultramarine. The nice thing about using the ultramarine is that I'll get some granulation, especially in this grassy area. That would be nice. Okay, so that's what's going to happen here. I'll bring you in from time to time to show you the progress of the painting. I've combined a little bit of sap green with a little bit of Prussian green, and then toned it down with a little bit of Viridian. So I want it to be sort of a shadow color for these maple leaves. I think that's pretty good. There's already a little bit of blue, of course, in the background, so I'm just going to draw in some of these with my, now some of them I mentioned have already got a little bit of shadow on them, shadow color in the yellow. So I'm going to put a little bit of a touch up on that, but not too much. I don't want it to be too much at this point. So I'll start that process just to see how it works. And some of these leaves that are partly in shadow. And I'm not going to make them too precise. I just want to indicate the general shapes of the leaves. These are big maple leaves. So they have this classic large shape. I find that I have one very old maple tree, and its leaves are much smaller than the younger trees. And I think that as they get older and the tree is less vigorous, the leaves are a little smaller, it seems. But anyway, so that's a start. And I'm just going to put it on some of these leaves that are in the light as a start. And then I'm going to put in some other leaves that are completely in shadow. It's just beginning to scope it out. Generally, when you're doing foliage, you don't want to get too caught up in detail. So I'm just roughing out some of these, and I'll change the color to make some of the greens a little lighter and some a little darker as I go along. And that will help to distinguish individual leaves, but certainly we won't be looking at them all to be precisely drawn. I think the only thing that will be fairly precise is the trunk of that tree and the wind chimes, because those are the main items in the painting. And the rest is kind of supporting actors, not the main actors. So it's just doing some individual areas, because there'll be places where the light will come through. But I am looking at my photograph and pretty much trying to capture the structure of the tree and where its leaves are and where the ones that are in shadow are. And there'll be some will be made much darker and put a little detail in the second layer of color. But this is a good start. Just putting some shape into some of these with this. It's probably about a size 8 round by a Skoda, a synthetic brush. Very nice. Good bounce, as they say. Bounces when the point bounces right back and doesn't bend and stay bent. I like the Chinese brushes, but they do tend to bend and stay bent. So they're more, I guess you get used to them with calligraphic work, but for something like this, it's nice. I put it down and the point just comes right back. So it's a beginning right there. I'm going to put a little bit of ultramarine blue in this mix, and so you can see it. Put a little bit of ultramarine blue in this mix because this tree here is almost entirely in shadow. There are branches, but I'm going to just put in lots of individual little marks of groupings of leaves. Okay. As a beginning, I might put in more later, but I don't want to overdo it now. Just get it started. After doing various groups of leaves, the trunks of the trees will be put in between those groups of leaves. And to some extent, there'll be a little bit of detail, but not too much. And there's quite a lot of light in the upper part that is coming through. So I'll leave that. Okay, so this tree back here has a lot of little tiny leaves, and I am going to just show that there are a lot of little tiny leaves back there, and then those will be made darker later too, because since they're behind and they're totally in shadow. But I'm just going to indicate them now between the big leaves of the tree in front. Okay. I'm going to put a little more ultramarine blue in this mix right here, because it's a very good match to the color of the wind chimes. So I'm just going to start that process with a certain amount of color coming down. And defining those. And then I'll glaze over these a little bit later with all one color, so that the light part of it has a light glaze. And that will darken also the the other part of it. But I'm just going to put that shadow shape. And here you can see it, and I'll show it to you again. See the shadow of the disc and some of the dappling on the, I'll do the same thing over here, putting some of that wind chime definition in here in some of these. More detail can come in later if it's needed. The main thing right now is just to capture the main shapes and some of the shadows. Okay. All right. I think the next step that I want to do is to create a basic color for the tree in front. And to do that, I think I'd like to work with some raw sienna. Yeah, I think that's good. And I'll put some burnt umber in with that. Yeah, I think that will work. Okay, so it's a little darker on the edge. That's going into shadow. A tiny bit on this side, but more on this side is in shadow. Okay, so we'll just put that down. And then a more watery mixture would glaze over this. We can always come back and do even more browns and more depth, but I don't want to do too much at the beginning because I don't want to lose the light. And just shape some of these roots that are really very strongly protruding out of the ground. And some strong shadows are there. I love these gnarly roots on this tree. It's really quite pretty. Of course, when I'm going over it with my lawnmower, it's a little bumpy, and I have to raise the blade and try to avoid making a mess, but getting in there as close as I can. Yeah, that's a nice beginning. These are just initial layers, with the watercolor being like stained glass, layering over the colors below. And the colors below, if you're using a lot of transparent color, which is what we are doing, I have almost no opaque color anywhere on my palettes. That I can't say I 100% avoid making mud, but it does help me in minimizing making mud by sticking to transparent colors and carefully layering them on. I'll put a little bit of some of this will be here. Remind myself that the tree is going to be between these leaves, and I don't want to put in a whole lot of foliage to cover the tree in this area. And it will be much more in shadow after a while. But for now, it's a good start. Yeah, and I like the yellow coming through, but not too much. Because this is rough paper, you're seeing some of the color going into the little crevices, giving the tree some texture. Okay, that's a good beginning. Now for the one in behind, they'll be basically the same colors. I'll go back and get some more raw sienna and some more burnt umber. And we did have a lower part of the tree in back is very much in the light, but there's quite a lot of shadow. Starting fairly low. Okay, so we have the bottom part all light. I put the horizon line there. I'm going through the tree, so I'm going to have to cover that somehow. So I'll just put in some of these tree shapes that are here between the groups of leaves. Okay. Okay, there's trying to work around the camera. It's hard. Sometimes my hand gets really in too much touching the paper because I can't move the board and work around the board in the same way that I would without a camera in the way. And again, this just indicate that there's a tree back here. Okay. I think it's a good place to, I'm going to stop, but I am going to put a little bit of foliage that exists over here, so that I don't lose that. There are a lot of bushes over in this part, and I think I'll just indicate them roughly at this point. They're actually quite large, but I don't need to make them as large as they are. Some more bushes behind this, just going out a little bit over here. There's a fence there, but instead of a fence, I think I like the idea of putting some bushes there instead, just to indicate what there is a very tall fence. So this to keep my dogs out of the neighbor's property. Yeah. So. Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's good. There's also actually a horse pasture over here, and there are some fence posts for the horse pasture. But I think I'll just go with some simple foliage. Okay. Now the question is, do I put some grass in now or later? We've got this bluish grain here. but we need more of a little more of an olive and a little more yellow. So I'm trying to figure out how to make that color look real. I think I'll put some of the raw sienna in there. That gives it a bit of an earthy tone. Let me put some more of that in there. And that the grass is actually much greener than that, but we don't want to overdo that in terms of that kind of yellow color. So I'm just going to loosely put some of that grassy color in here. And I'm going to go around some of those dappling marks. I actually don't have to go around them because the yellow will come through. No, I do have to go around them. Okay, I thought I could avoid that, but I can't. So we'll just go around them. Again, we're still working just on initial layers. And oftentimes with grass, I might go in and do dry brush to really give it that texture, a sense of texture of the grass. You can also use a little bit of granulating paint. That will help to go into the crevices. And I'll do that a little bit later. When you go into the granulation and the dry brush, then it's hard to make changes. And whereas just a thin wash, we can always make corrections and changes to a thin wash. This is mostly water coming in, just changing the tone of a lot of this slightly blue wash that we put in to a more greenish color, a greenish hue. You know, and this is an area where I could use my Hake brush, but I just want a little more control to make sure I go around in these areas of roots and things without getting paint on the trees or the other things that I've put in here already. Okay. Oh, it's beginning to emerge. Yeah. Now, I haven't started to put in the shadow yet, but I will just basically put in the green tone, but not the shadow yet. The shadow is going to be quite dark and dramatic, so that will be the last thing we do. Okay, I think that's enough for now. Let this dry, and it probably will dry quite a lot lighter than what it is now. And then we'll put in more detail about leaves and things. Okay, I hope you're enjoying this. Take care. Hello again. I felt inspired to try to figure out what I wanted to do with that background. So I've created a little bit of a repositioning of the houses, my neighbor's house and his little barn. And so that is, I did it off camera. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to keep it like that. So for now, I just want to focus on the trees. I'm going to take a little bit of burnt umber for the tree in the back that is in shadow. And so I want browns that are not warm. And I'm going to put a little bit of burnt umber on that to start. And then I'm going to go to a little bit of Van Dyke brown. And even though the tree is in shadow, some parts of it are more in shadow than others, so I'll just put some dark on the shadow side. I'm not going to put a lot of detail in that, just a little bit here and there, indicating some of those branches. And then I'll take my smaller brush and indicate a few of the smaller branches just here and there. Oops. Sometimes my smaller brushes, it's a soft bristle, it's a soft sable, so it doesn't always hold a strong point. I'll go now with a rigger and put in just a few very fine lines with the rigger. Again, I'm just using that Van Dyke brown straight from the tube. Don't really want to put Payne's gray or violet in there and darken the color. I think that there's enough sunlight still reaching the tree that it should have a little bit of warmth. And so just put a few of these little branches here and there. Okay. That'll be enough detail, I think, for that. Have that bring some of that color down into the foliage here so it shows through that the tree is behind the foliage. Okay, it's a big maple. I'm showing the leaves as smaller than what's in the foreground maple, but the tree is about the same size. I'm going to do the same over here, but I'm going to on the other tree in the background, but it's more in the light, so I'm going to put burnt sienna in that color so that it's warmer. Again, it's another maple, sugar maple. These are sugar maples. And we have in the past tapped some of these, especially this one here, very old, and next to a stream that runs down on the side here. And we got the most sap from the trees that were next to the stream. And Roxbury is kind of known for its maple syrup being very buttery in flavor. We have a really wonderful flavor maple syrup, and even people from Vermont comment that our maple syrup is really wonderful. has something to do with the soil and the water and the temperatures. And okay, so I'm just putting a little bit of detail in here. I'm not going to fuss about it now. I don't want to take the chance of overworking something in the background that should be a bit more diffused. Okay. And I'll put down at the base, there are a little bit of shadows between the roots here that are away from the sun. And the shadows here are just from the leaves and then on the side of the tree in the back. I think that's probably good enough for now. Actually, that tree goes up quite a bit. It's a very tall tree, and some of these boughs are really tall also. So I'm just going to indicate that. And then I'll come back with maybe a little bit more foliage on that later. Again, more very, very long branches. And I'll put some more leaves in front later. But that's a good start. Yeah, I think. Okay. This foliage that I put in here, I put in here instead of the fence that is there. And, but it is somewhat how it would look without the fence, so. Lots of bushes, lots of rhododendrons, flowering trees in all the neighbors' properties. A lot of forsythia, so everything blooms at different times, but I decided to put in some contrasting blues and greens there. So we'll let that dry. Well, I think that for me, for my style, I've got the background trees pretty close to done, except for maybe a little foliage, a little blending. But I put a little bit of ultramarine and violet where there's some shadows of the foliage, and over here not as much, a little more shadowing on the house and a little shadow by the chimney and the barn. I think that I don't want to have, the sun is really shining on that barn, so I think I don't want to put too much definition on it. That's probably enough. I put in a little more ultramarine and Antwerp blue, which is more of a bluish green, in the depths of some of this foliage. I'll show you a touch more. It's a little darker, less water, and a little blue-green. Just a small amount of, see how I move my brush, very, I'm not saying this is the way you should do it for yours, but I like to put down little dabbling marks. It's a little bit like pointillism or impressionism, but one layer over another, and Just little marks here and there rather than big solid marks. And then I have over here put a little bit of marks. I'll put just a tiny bit more with the Antwerp blue. And I put in a slight Payne's Gray and quinacridone violet shadow over here for the tree. It's and what I want to do now is do this tree here. So I think I'll take a little bit of I think I'll do a little bit of brush stroke on that tree. So for that, I'll take a small flat and do a little bit of dry brush on that tree. This is a 1/2 inch flat by Connoisseur. It's a Taklon mix. And so I'll just go into some burnt umber, which is a nice neutral brown, not too red, not too dark, very neutral. But I'm just going to put in a little bit of texture. Let me test it first on a piece of paper. Otherwise you'll just have yeah, that's what I'm wanting to do. So, fairly dry brush and paint that's not too and if I glaze over that with some more color, it will still show through. As long as I don't wet it too much, it won't re-dilute. I have to use a different brush for wetting my paint, because if I use this brush for wetting my paint, it won't be dry anymore. So I'll use a different round brush to make a puddle of a little bit of a flat puddle, not too wet, but it makes it easy for me to put this dry brush in to the edge of it, take a little color, test it, yeah, and get those marks in there. Okay. Once you get the consistency of the paint and you get the brush dry enough and working the way you want it to do, so that begins to show. You see this wonderful texture on the tree. Oh, you can see it, I hope. And for me, I think the best way for me to try to just give the impression of that texture is to do this dry brush. And once that's done, and every now and then I'll put in a few lines with the side of the brush to show that the bark does have some of those continuous kind of lines going down. But I want to focus on the dry brush with this first pass. And every now and then, like I said, I'll put in some of those vertical marks of the bark. And again, this is a maple tree. I don't believe this is a sugar maple, this one. This one behind is a sugar maple, and it has a very different bark, more shaggy looking and rough. I don't need to do too much up here because that's going to be in shadow. So the texture wouldn't be showing. Do a little bit. This is the center of the painting, this tree, so I have to be careful not to put a big blob of color down that I can't get rid of, and that would ruin the whole painting. And as the trunk of the tree turns, those little ridges that are vertical patterns, they look closer together because the tree is turning. So just putting in some of those. Not only is this side in shadow, but because of the turning, the marks. I'm going to make a few more. I'm going to put some more burnt sienna. I'm going to add a little bit of Van Dyke brown now to that mix. Taking a little Van Dyke brown, bringing it in with the, burnt umber. It's a little darker now. The allergies are pretty horrific lately, so I'm sorry about my sniffling. At least I'm not having a sneezing fit at the moment. But when I go out and mow the lawn, my dogs bark at me because I'm sneezing so much. They don't know what kind of animal I am. They don't know whether to be distressed or not distressed. Okay, and I'm just making that burnt umber a little stronger now. Going around here again. I'm trying to handle this very, very carefully and not overdo it. That's always the biggest danger in watercolor, is just going that one little bit of a step too far. Okay, I think for the I'm going to build in some of these shadows and curvatures and these incredible roots now with this brush. I could use the round brush too on this, but I'll just continue with this one for the moment. It's no longer acting like a dry brush. The mixture is a little wetter. And this is very big gnarly thing over here. I'm going to put a little more color on it because it's got all this character to it. So and I'm going to bring a little bit of the transparent red oxide into this mix, so it's not all just flat looking brown. Some of this is going to go into shadow, and the transparent red oxide is like a bright, it's transparent, but it's similar to the color of burnt sienna. Sometimes people use it instead of burnt sienna, but it's a little more reddish, but it fits well within the browns, and it just takes it up a little bit of a notch in terms of red hue. Okay, now I'm going to go for a bit of violet. I'm going to take some Mars violet and put it over in this shadow area with within the texture. Mars violet is a very, I'll just show you, not everybody has it on their palette, but it's a sort of a nice reddish, brownish, maroon kind of violet color. So it's in the brown family, but moving toward the violet. But you wouldn't really want to use an imperial violet over here. It would be too blue and dark and not as vibrant. Okay, so that it helps to know your colors and practice with them so that you know what they're going to be able to do. Of course, you can also mix some of these colors by putting some red in with a violet and changing more of that red in the, I might be able, let's see if what happens if I take some, let me take some Van Dyke Brown, for example. Okay, I'll take some Van Dyke Brown, and I put some of that transparent red oxide in that. And you see I can also make a very nice reddish color that can be used. And since that one is a little more transparent than the Mars violet, I'm going to bring a little bit of that in. I'm going to start to shape the shadow of this tree. Put a little bit of this color up in here so that the tree begins to have some shape. I'm going to switch brushes to a small round because I want to take that Mars violet up a notch and put in the depth of shadow that's over here on the back side. So I'm taking the Mars violet and mixing it actually with the Van Dyke Brown and putting in some very, very dark shadows similar to what's in the photograph. I'll just put this up here for now so you can see it. And just have a reminder of where there are some intense shadows. I haven't drawn the roots exactly, but I'll put in another root here. And it sort of bends down, has a little knuckle. Here's another one. So the idea is just to get a sense of the roots, how they have little crevices and they bend and move. And then near the ground there's a little more shadow. Put another one over there. Once you've got the feel of the roots, you can change them a little bit. Just suit how you feel as you're moving along. I'm going to put a little bit more over here. Have one coming down here into the ground. And over here, coming down into the ground there. And then in the, I'm going to take a little bit of indigo and put that into the mix. It makes then a very dark, you see a little bit of indigo. added to that Van Dyke and Mars Violet. Okay, so now I go into the final shadow here at the roots, which is very, very dark. And I'm not making it just a Payne's gray, though. I'm making it a colorful, vibrant shadow as much as I can. So in the deepest crevices, I'll put this little mixture of indigo as an accent here and there. Okay, that's starting to look, and I'll put a little bit of that indigo up in here. Make some different shapes. When the roots come up, they have some form to them relative to the tree. So I'll put some of that shapes in here, you see, so it's not just smooth and straight. Okay. When you're working very close up, there's a tendency to want to really detail this very precisely, but when you stand back, it's probably detailed enough. And you've got to let the viewer do part of the work themselves of completing the picture, not getting distracted by the detail. Okay, I think the base of that tree is working pretty well. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take a bit of switch palettes here, and that's my Earth Colors, just to show you. This is my Earth Colors palette, so I don't mind when my yellows and browns mix together a little bit on that. I'm going to go now to my reds and violets palette, and I have some Payne's gray on that palette, and I'm going to take some of that Payne's gray, which is a very good shadow color. I could also use some what's called neutral tint. I'll show you that. I have that on my palette too. I can mix the two together. I want to get a kind of, I don't like that color. I want it a little more gray. And I'm going to take it, I need a little bit of tone of green in it. So I'm going to take some Prussian green, which is a dark green, and I'm going to put that in it. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better color for the very dark shadow here on the grass. One that is a cast shadow on green grass, but yeah, I like that a little better. You can see in the photograph how dark it is. It's very, very dark at the base of the tree because the tree is wide and not very much light is getting through to the center of this, whereas a lot of light gets through between the leaves to make a shadow, and those shadows are lighter. But this one shadow is very, very dark. So I'm just going to put that in. So when you're painting, it's a matter of thinking about what is it that you're seeing and painting it based on what it is. Of course, you paint what you see, but you also think about what you see and change it to make sure that, you know, because it's so easy to look at a photograph or even to look at the shadows when you're outside and say, oh, it's a gray shadow. But it's generally not a gray shadow. It's got lots of color in it. And the more that you've been a painter, the more that you've looked at shadows and thought about how would I mix that color, so that every time you looked at a shadow, you're kind of mixing the color in your mind. You know, the shadow's a little wider at the base and it gets a little narrower as it goes up. It also gets a little lighter as it goes up. So as it goes up, it begins to become a lighter shadow back here. So I'll just show that. And then there's a little bit of shadow behind the roots as well. You know, this is a good time for me to probably also think about the shadow of the wind chimes, but I'll wait a little longer on that. And I'll put a little bit of this same shadow color in this area here, just so that there's some harmony between what's happening. The color of that shadow is a little lighter, and there's a lot more sun. It's not as dark, but anyway, just okay. Now, in terms of the I'm going to make this tree area that is in shadow also darker. It's not going to be the color of the green, but it's more that color of a mixture of the Payne's gray with the Mars violet and the Van Dyke brown. So I'm going to get some of this. Oh dear, dear, dear. I just put my hand in that shadow. That happens so often when you move from one area of the painting to the other. It doesn't happen as much when I'm not on camera, because I just can move the board around and always place the board in a way that my hand is not going into wet paint. Okay. So I'll take a little more of that Mars violet and Van Dyke brown and a little Payne's gray I'll put in here. Okay. I'm going to brace my hand so it's not touching the board. I also have a nice little gadget. Let me just use it. This is a little plexiglass gadget that makes it very, very convenient. Just rest your hand. You just place it down. It's got two legs on either both ends. You know, see, it's just shaped like that. And you can put it over your painting and rest your hand on it. I should remember to use it more often than I do. But anyway. So I'm just putting in some of this tree trunk that is in shadow behind the leaves. And varying it a little bit, not too much. Not getting carried away with the diversity of the bark and stuff. I just wanted to make sure that it's shown as being in shadow. Okay. Now, in the photograph, that shadow comes down quite a bit. These leaves here in front cast a shadow a little bit lighter. So you can just see I'm sort of dabbling my brush a little bit, leaving a few specks of light peeking through. There is a branch over here. I'm going to just indicate it because it's a good idea to show a little bit the beginning of branches of this tree in the front. Yeah, I think that's enough. And as you can see, there's a little bit of diversity in the shadow color. Some is a little lighter, some is a little darker. And it should be darkest with the most darkness right here on the shadow side of the tree. We have not only the shadow of the tree turning, but also the shadow of the leaves above. So that part should be darkest. I think that's probably good enough for now. So I'm just going to leave this to dry completely and look at it and see if it needs a little more color intensity here or there. A little more shadow color here and there. Kind of negative painting around this leaf that'll be in front and the cast shadow there. Okay. I think next I might tackle the wind chimes and then the foliage, and then the final shadow of the wind chimes on the grass and on the tree. There's actually a cast shadow of these wind chimes on the tree. I could put that in. I could put that in the beginning now. And the disc. So it'll be the chimes coming down. And the disc. Yeah, I think that begins to give us an idea of that. I like that. A little more intensity here. Good. Okay, we'll let that dry. See you in a little bit. Okay, I've just used a little bit of Terra Verte, which is a lovely soft color, bluish, transparent green, very light. I put a lot of water into it, and Instead of using a flat brush to do dry brush, I used this to go on the side of the round brush like this, you see? And just put in some color, some texture in the foreground. You see, with the side of the round. But this is a synthetic brush, so it's stiff, but by putting on the side, you get a very different kind of textural look. And it's just skimming along the top of the rough paper so that it's hitting the little peaks of the rough paper, you see? It's hitting the little peaks of the rough paper. You couldn't do this on hot press, but this is cold press rough by Fabiano. I think it's there. It's a very nice rough. So I'm just putting a little bit of texture in here and there. That is with this terre verte, but you could also just make a little mixture of cobalt blue and another green to get. But this is it's a nice gentle green. It's terre verte in French means green earth. So it's considered to be a good natural earthy color for green. I'm going to put a little bit in here between these green chimes, and that's going to sit. I put a little bit of shadow with Payne's gray and a little bit of magenta mix, so it's kind of a violet Payne's gray mix here. A shadow on the building, a little bit of shadow behind this tree and on the foliage, and intensified a little bit the shadow of this tree at the base, intensified the shadow at the base a little bit of this tree. And so we'll let that sit. There's a little bit of a bloom there, which I don't like very much. Yeah. Smooth that out a little bit. It's hard to smooth out those blooms when they happen. It's a little bit of wet water gets on the paint and back makes it back full. Okay. But I can take a little bit of this texture and bring it into that, because there's no reason why there can't be a little bit of texture in the shadow as well. So I'll just do that. Okay. In the shadow here, put a little shadow here with Payne's gray and a little bit of ultra quinacridone violet, and making the shadows of the tree here. And then every now and then stuck in a little bit of transparent red in the shadow like this. You see this little transparent red, just to change the color of the shadow a little bit, so it's not too flat as Payne's gray. And Payne's gray and a little bit of, you'll remember we put a little bit of Cascade green in that. And a little bit of, but I like a little bit of the transparent red, which is a brownish red, very transparent, just in that shadow here and there to warm it up. But I've got to stop, because if I do too much, it'll become muddy. Okie doke. Here we go. We'll let this go, let it dry. I'll go take care of, feed the horses, and oh, it's hard to stop. A little mark here is needed. More shadow there is needed. Okay. Okay, time to stop. time to feed the horses. See you then. Bye. Okay, I'm back from feeding horses, which was really fun. The water was running and it filled the trough, and my big Palomino came over, and so I started to spray her, and she looked like she was in such ecstasy. She stood there for the longest time. I think she would have stood there all day if I would have let her, just because it's so hot outside, and she just stood there loving the spray of the cold water. The other horses didn't come near. They don't tend to like it, but she loved it, and it was so nice to make her happy like that. I enjoyed it. So I'm going to take this little filbert by called Black Snow Creative Mark. It was a gift when I ordered some other brushes, and they just put it in the package. I didn't order it, but it's a nice brush, and I'm sure it was put in the package to encourage me to get some more of those brushes, and maybe at some point I will, because it really is a nice brush. So to do the wind chime, I want to use some of my greens, and parts of the chimes are light, other parts are dark. I want to make this a little more clearly green in the shadow side, and increase the sharpness of the edge here, because it's a very sharp metal disc, and I think if anything has an edge in this painting, that should have it. So I'll do a little negative painting also around it to increase the edge there. And then in terms of the other side, again, I think I'll do a little more negative painting on this side of the disc. Make that edge very sharp and circular disc, show the circular disc. Okay, just straightening that out a little bit, putting a tiny bit of color in that yellow, but not much. I want it to remain in shadow. Okay, and then I'll do a little bit of the same over at this disc, but this one's a little different. It's not in shadow, and I can't do any negative painting around it, but I'll just increase the sharpness of that edge of that metal disc. We've already shown that it has a very nice shadow here, so it has to be clear enough in shape that it warrants that very dark, sharp shadow on the tree. And I'll just put a little bit of a cord down. Now, there is a disc in the center here, but I'm not going to paint it in because it's a little too complicated, so I'm just going to show the cord, but not anything else, not the big round disc. It's just a little too hard for me to figure out how to make that look right. Yeah, this brush is working pretty nicely. It says it's a filbert, which means that the edge is not, it's a little bit of a flat and a little bit rounded on the edge. I think you can see that's a filbert. And it's behaving very, very nicely. So Now let me use, I'm still sticking with that Cascade green. I think it's actually a pretty good match for what this is, so I don't know if I need to mix much in the way of color. I'm going to carry down the edge on this furthest one, and that way my fingers, my palm of my hand will not be making marks on wet paint by doing it this way. And a little bit of this edge here, and some of the shadow here inside. I'm just sharpening this up. We had already done some work on it to put a little bit of color and light in it. But now I'm just giving it a little bit of definition, maybe a little there. And I'm going to carry some of that color down over the yellow that was put there so that it shows as a light version of the same color. And then under this leaf here, I'll make this darker. So there's one of the pipes right there. Yeah, very subtle bit of shadowing and dappling. Again, I'll put a little bit of watered down color over the yellow here, but I'll take the more concentrated color without as much water and show that this pipe here. And again, put it between the leaf, show it in shadow under the leaf. Okay, so I'm going to carry forward with this. It's a very, very big, long wind chime. It goes up to about here, actually, so it finishes up above the leaves, but I'm going to show the wind chime going up a little bit, showing how long it is. So there's the edge of one of the pipes. I didn't draw this in, as you remember, so I'm just drawing it as I'm painting it. I look at these every day because the horses are right over here, and I go out twice a day and feed them. And then I often just, while I'm out there, I ring the chimes because they sound so pretty. Like one of my favorite things in the whole yard are these wind chimes. Mostly, though, I run around and play them more than I don't hear them so much with the wind, but sometimes it's very windy. But there's a beautiful sound. Okay, so that's the way I'm going to just do the wall, and I really don't need you to be bothered with watching me do that. I'm just going to use the Cascade Green, which is a perfect color for that. I have it here on my palette, you see. This is Cascade Green, and when it's watered down. So it's a great color, I love it. So I'll finish that up and come back to you when I do the shadow on the ground. Okay, so we've got a shadow here from this wind chime. We need a shadow here for this one. So I'm going to take, again, let's see, a little bit of Payne's Gray. little bit of Payne's Gray. A little bit of quinacridone violet. And a little bit of that cascade green that is in the grass. And do an initial view of the shadow. So I'm going to have it come like this. Here's a little disc shape. And in the centers of the shadows, they're always a little darker. Do another one behind. Some of the leaves around the top of that wind chime, you can see leaves here, are also casting a shadow, so that is part of the process of showing that. Wherever you have both leaves and wind chime, the shadow would be darker from the combination of things blocking the light. I think that's okay. And the last part of this is to put in some of the leaf colors. The Windsor Green is a nice shade to put over some of this yellow. I think it comes close to, leave a little few highlights, but it comes close to the colors. I'll put in some details, but I think I'll put in some of this Windsor Green here and there. I'm just doing some of that. And then, I'm going to go to a much darker combination of greens. I'll take a little bit of Hooker's green, take some of the Windsor green. You can see the colors I'm mixing here. Took a little Hooker's green. I think you can see it. Yeah, move it a little closer over here. Yeah, little Hooker's green, which is more yellow, and then the Windsor green, which is a little more blue. Mix them together a bit, and take some of that Cascade green to get into the darker areas. I think that's the beginning of the more intense foliage in the back here. And I'm just going to modelly, just going to put it in here and there. Draw some of those leaves in with my brush. That's just a start. And some of the leaves in the foreground will have a little more intensity. I'll put a little more Hooker's green in there now. I'm going to vary the colors from leaf to leaf, making some darker, some lighter. You can see the variation happening, and just as they would depending on which are more in light and which are less in light. I might put a little bit of Antwerp blue in the mix here and there. This is the Antwerp blue. Put a little bit of that in there. Have some of the leaves be more on the bluish side. It's okay. The key thing is to indicate variation based on how far back they are and how much in shadow they are. It's really fun to see the painting begin to emerge and try to keep some of its lightness, not overwork it. There's quite a lot of transparency in all these colors, so the Aurelian yellow is very transparent that I put down at the beginning of the video. And now these colors, even though they're mixed, they're very transparent, all of them. Put a little more Antwerp blue in there, a little more Cascade. It's getting a little darker. And going over into this part of the tree where the leaves are a little darker and more in shadow. So, and I'm going to do it right over that tree behind. Remember here I had drawn some big leaves at the beginning. So I'm still sticking with that concept of these leaves being rather large because they're in the foreground, but they're in shadow. So even though we have that tree in the background, we're covering it up to some extent, but some of it is still showing through. And this is the Cascade green, very intense here and there. just less water. A little bit of the Antwerp blue, less water. You can blend some of that out. And then we have a number of intermediate dark leaves above the wind chime and around it, but behind the lighter leaves. A little bit of the hooker's green, which is more yellow there. So I just have these colors on my palette. I know it's a little unusual to work this way. Some people just have a few things on their palette to do plein air, but I have a lot of colors on my palette because I've spent a lot of my painting time overseas, and I would travel with my palette rather than tubes, which would burst in the pressure of the plane if I wasn't careful. So this way I didn't have any problems and could just put the colors on these in these John Pike. This is a John Pike palette and it has a cover. So just before leaving my hotel overseas, I would run a hairdryer over it. I usually would stop painting the day before so it wasn't too wet. And then I would run a hairdryer over the paints and put the cover on, and they would travel beautifully. And some of these colors have been on my palette for 10, 15 years and traveled all over the world. And I just refresh them. I refresh the colors that I use a lot, like cobalt blue, cerulean blue, alizarin crimson, the Aureolian yellow, the ones that I really tend to use in almost all paintings. Scarlet, vermilion, Payne's gray, burnt sienna, burnt umber, Van Dyke brown. These are the main ones. I mean, they also tend to be the main ones put into plein air palettes, but the main ones I use a lot and therefore have to keep refreshing on my palette. But some of the ones have been on the palette a long time, but they never go bad as long as you periodically let your paints totally dry out. They don't have any mold or anything develop. Then they last for many, many, many years. You just got to keep the palette dry. Once you're finished using it, clean it up and keep it totally dry between uses. Otherwise it could get some mold on it and that could ruin the colors. Alright, so I'm just going to do something like that and continue that kind of rough, very rough application of different greens and blues to make the foliage here, but leave some spaces between so that the light is showing through. Just to indicate and these leaves. And over here it's really all foliage with just a little bit of shadow on that house behind. So continue with that. And it's dark foliage for the most part. And I'm just using the side of the brush, sometimes the tip of the brush. This is the, it's about a 6 round Escoda synthetic brush. So it's got a nice tip. Sometimes it will give me, if I want to use the tip, it'll give me a sharp little mark. I can use the side to make that kind of scumbling mark on the side. So I can do quite a lot of different, see the scumbling mark on the side like that. So I can have quite a lot of variation here, little scumbling marks here and there. But this is all being done with normal watercolor brush strokes. No special gimmicks in this one of cling wrap or salt or anything like that, which I love to use sometimes. It depends on what it's all about, but that's not what this painting is about. So this painting is about pretty much just straightforward brushstroke. The Antwerp blue is lovely here and there. Brightens that up around the focal point, which is this set of wind chimes in the shadow. A little more scumbling with the Antwerp blue. Instead of green, just to let some of that wonderful vivid blue carry in here and there. Okay, so I will work on this a bit more. There'll be some foliage over here with smaller leaves, and but pretty much this is getting very, very close to being done. So I'll come back with just a bit more done, and then we will be wrapping it up. I hope you're enjoying the process. Thanks. Well, I've just brought a little more detail into the wind chimes, a little more grass here and there. I've taken my hake brush and dipped that into some color and put some, with the hake brush, it's dry, put some of that detail on with the dry brush. And a little bit of blue and a little bit of darker green, and let the hake brush just dipped into the color, create a little bit of texture, additional texture with the with the dry brush, but not dry brush in this way, but just letting the bristles, the end of the bristles, because of the way that they spread, just let them, and put some of this extra detail in there. And then take my rigger and put a little bit more of grass here and there. Just a few marks here and there. So, and just some squigglies and calligraphic marks here and there, just to increase all the detail and activity around the focal point of these two detailed wind chimes, and the intensity of difference in the shadows and the light in this area. So I think that's probably See, I'm just taking the rigger and making some marks, not being overly concerned about them, but just, I don't want to overdo it, but just enough to indicate grass and detail is out there. Okay, this is now a finished piece. Thank you for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed some of the procedures that I used. Take care. Bye-bye.